Hello, everybody. This is Barry Wilds from Sequence Solutions, and this is your aha moment. So, in today's video, we are going to discuss the new advanced head moving model and how to set it up in xLights.
So in the layout here, I have several different manufacturers of moving heads. And the reason I did that is I'm going to show you how to set these up. I'm going to focus mainly on the Starlight, the YPS Starlight, but I will touch on the other manufacturers because some are slightly different. But the process will be the same no matter what manufacturer you have. And if your manufacturer isn't in here, then you just need to follow the same set of steps when you set it up, and everything will work fine. The whole idea with the new effect and the new model is that once you set up an xLights, it shouldn't matter which manufacturer moving head you have. If the sequencers are using the new effect, which I am at Sequence Solutions, and several of the more reputable sequencers out there are, that it will work no matter what. And you don't have to have a lot of conversions and things needed to make it work, because the old way of programming moving heads using the DMX commands made it very manufacturer specific. And we'll talk about that when we go into the sequencing portion of the moving heads. So let's assume that I have a moving head brand and I want to put it in my display. If you go up here and select the DMX effect, you're going to have several options. You can have floodlights, general. A general would be like if you're doing a fog machine or a cold spark machine or flamethrower or any of the other devices that allows you to set up a DMX set of channels so that you can use it. We're going to use the moving head advanced. So this is the new model that was added to xLights, and we're going to pick that. Then I'm going to drag until I get a certain size here, and I'm just going to plop that down. Now, the only thing I don't like is when you put these down, it's hard to grab these tabs and move them around, especially the green, because you can't really see it. But you would move it around in your display, and it gives us the raw data or the raw parameters that we need to put it in there. So, and it comes up as a DX moving head. Now, what I do, and I think is a good standard practice, is I would go in here and call this moving head. Being I have 6, I would say this is moving head 7, and then you can call it whatever you want, either your manufacturers or DMX moving head, or you can call it Charlie, whatever name you want, whatever makes you happy. I like to have MH7 or some distinction at the beginning so that I know of each moving head, and this will make more sense in a minute when we talk about setting up and grouping these moving heads, okay? So I'll go in there and enter it, and then what happens is you get a list of parameters that show up. Now, I'm not going to use this particular one. I'm going to go through the ones that I've already got set up just because it'll make the process a little quicker. But that's one way to do it. So the second way, which is the way I would recommend and is the easiest and will ensure that you get a model that's kind of already proven, is to use an existing model that's been set up. And if you go to the Sequence Solutions website, there will be a Moving Heads tab. If you go onto the Moving Heads tab, it will have information for most of the major manufacturers of moving heads. It'll give you the ability to download the xLights model for free, and it will also give you the channel layouts and stuff if available, so that you have all that information in one spot. You can also get the models from your manufacturer. A lot of the reputable manufacturers out there, your Pixel stores, usually go through the affiliate. So there's several of us that work with Miner over there, and we have them on the sequencers websites along with Matos and some of the other brands out there. So, but that information will be on the website, and that way it's available for you. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to select this import up here, and then we're going to drag the box, and it's going to open up a window that says, okay, choose where you want the file of your models. Now, you'll store your model somewhere on your computer where you can find it. Now, in this case, I have one on the models. here's all the various manufacturers of moving heads. I'm going to pick the Starlight. I'm going to open it up, and it's going to automatically plop that moving head in to the display. Now, I will say one thing that's a little tricky with this when they first come in is you can't see the pull bars, to like I can kind of see the green there to move it. So it's kind of a quirk in xLights. So you kind of sometimes have to play around with being able to get to where you can change that and find kind of the center of it. And that's kind of a challenge with the way the models come in sometimes. And like there, I clicked. You can see I kind of got the bar, so I can start kind of dragging this down and dragging it in and resizing it to get it to a size that I want. I can also go this way and kind of reach around here until the finger, you see how the finger goes, and I can get it in and size it. And then I can kind of click on the middle here and I can put it wherever in the display that I want. Okay. And what it's going to do is it's going to import and it's going to already have several of the key parameters set up for you and already. So I'm going to leave that one there for the moment, just as a reference. Now, a trick if you haven't seen it with your models and stuff. So I already have one set up. If I select that one and I select this one and I right click on it, I can resize it and say match size, and then it'll make everything uniform, right? And then I can move this around and I can put them in the rows or whatever I want. So let's look at, because there's a key point when you import these two that I want to talk about, because there's a little bit of xLights is always changing, and there are sometimes things aren't 100%. But one of the things you have to make notice when you use an import of an existing model is it does not bring the channels over for the dimmer and the shutter. They both come over as 0. So that'll eventually, I'm sure, get fixed. But for now, in the late, I'm in I think version 4 of 2025, so it's the latest at the time of this video. That is an issue that you have to be a little bit cognizant of. It's not a big one. You just need to know that you need to enter those values in there. Okay. So let's look at the moving heads. Now, when I put my moving heads in, one of the things I do is this is the convention I use. It's in my sequence layout for my store. I call it moving head 1, MH1, and then I will call it, whatever, moving head, Starlight moving head, YPS moving head, whatever your name, you could call it Fred, Charlie, Lisa, whatever you want to call it. Um, but I like to have the MH1 designation because it just tells me which moving head I've got in the sequence. So it's a naming convention. You could call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if you want. You could call it A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever makes sense to you. I just think it's good practice to have them lined up in an order so that you kind of know which ones are which. And this will become more apparent as we set things up. So when we plop it down, the first thing that we're going to set up in xLights after you've got the name for it is the fixture and the number of channels. So as we said before, when I showed you the sheets in for the the moving head, this is a 16 channel moving head. Okay, so we want to say the number of channels is 16. The number of fixed channels is 0, and then you have a fixture number. Now, when you click on this, you get a drop down, and it allows you to pick from a number from 1 to 8. Now, as of this version of xLights, you can only have a maximum of 8 different moving heads. That doesn't mean that you can't have more moving heads on your roof. It just means that you're going to have to name more than one of them with the same fixture number. And why that's important to understand is when you name a fixture, like if I name 2 of them called MH1, then both those fixtures are going to act identical to whatever MH1 is asked to do. Okay. So you have to be a little bit creative if you have more than 8 fixtures, because you're going to have to maybe call the end ones the same number so they both act the same, or or put them in groups. But again, you'll have to play with that a little bit on your own. So because this is the first one that I put in, I'm going to call it fixture 1, 16 channels. Now what this is going to tell it, xLights, is that this particular moving head uses 16 channels of data to um, to make it do what it needs to do. So the next one that I put in place that will follow this one will start at channel 17 through 32, and then 33 through 48, and so on. Now, if I hit the little plus sign, it'll open up the parameters for the pan. Now, remember, we talked about the pan operation, which is the rotation of this thing around 360 degrees. Now, what the new effect in xLights wants is it looks at the home position of the moving head to be facing forward to your audience and straight up. In other words, pointing to the sky. So what we're going to do in the model here is we're going to tell it where these various positions are so that xLights can do all the magic behind the scenes and do all the DMX calculations that it needs to do to make your moving head work. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go back to our channel guide. So if we go and look at the channel guide that we had for our particular moving head, the main pan was channel 1, and what we called pan fine was channel 3. So what we want to do is what's called coarse, or the main pan is channel 1, and then the fine pan is channel 3. So we put those in. Now, the model also gives us the ability to do a min and a max limit of movement. And again, this is with reference to the light pointing straight towards you. So like if you look at this one, its home position is straight forward, right? And I did that so that you could see kind of what it would look like. The only difference is it wants it to be pointing straight up. But for the pan location, you want it to be pointing towards the audience, okay? And then what you're saying basically is that my limit of motion is I can go minus 180, so it's half a turn around to the back, or plus 180, which is half a turn around the back to the other way. So in other words, I have 180 degrees of motion left to right to move to the back of the display. Now, if for some reason you've got something sensitive back here and you don't want the light, it's apartment building or something, you don't ever want the light to shine back there, you could make this less than 180. You could make it 90. And then what will happen is, even though the xLights may tell this light to move back to the back, it will have a hard stop at 90 degrees and only go to the left or the right, or some number of angle at the back. So it gives you the ability to kind of set a rotation limit from left to right if needed. You have to tell it the full range of motion. So again, most moving heads are going to have a 540 degree motion, okay? So it's important that you set that up because that tells xLights that 540 degrees, a value from 0 to 255 in DMX, will be a value of 540 degrees of rotation. And then there's an orient to 0 and orient to front. So orient to 0 is where is the 0 point of the light with reference to where the model is. So again, remember how I said where you want, how you mount that display. I've got this one pointing down to the right. So I have this model right now set up the way that it would be when you mount it on the roof and it's turned on. The light's going to be sitting this way. So I don't have to do anything else with that. That's my 0 position. Now what xLights is asking me is, okay, what is the orient? So what do I need to do to make it face forward? So if we go back to the slide from before, I'm pointing this way right now, right? I'm pointing down to the right. I need to tell xLights for me to be pointing forward, I need to come around, 270 degrees. So I put a value of 270 in there. So now what it's saying is to get this oriented to the front, I've got to rotate 270 degrees. Okay? And then that'll put me in the forward facing position. Now, slew rate is typically, that's given to you by the manufacturer. That is basically the speed of your moving head. So that's going to be unique to the moving head manufacturer. If you bring in the model already from the website. It'll already have this value put in. If not, you'll have to look in the owner's manual or contact the person who you bought the moving heads from and make sure you put the right value in there. And then you check this on whether it is a reverse or forward, counterclockwise or counterclockwise moving head. So in this case, it's a counterclockwise, so I want that checked. That tells xLights that, hey, it can only spin, or counterclockwise rotation is the 540 degrees that it wants to move. Now, you can also hang these upside down. Uh, so in theaters and concerts, you'll see these a lot of times hanging from a truss. So you do have the ability to check that, and then it makes everything work properly with the thing basically opposite, right? Because it's upside down. All right, so we set up the pan. So the next motion we got to set up is the tilt. So what the tilt is, if you go back again to our channel list that we had from before, the tilt, the coarse tilt or the main tilt was channel 2, and then the fine tilt was channel 4. It looks like I had a typo in there. I'll have to fix that. That should say fine. So if we look, channel 2 for the main course, channel 4 for the fine course. Now, for the tilting, which means the directions going this way and this way, I can set a min and max rotation of 180 degrees. So what that means is I'm allowed to tilt down 180 or back 180. Now, in the case of the motion of this, so let's look at the range of motion. This particular motion one has a 270 full range of tilt. So obviously you can't point straight down. So what's going to happen is, even though I told it 180 and minus 180, it will hit a hard stop at the, the 270 degree mark. And if you were to look at this light across, basically that means I have 45 degrees of motion from the vertical, or the horizontal, I'm sorry, on each side. So I can go down 45 degrees. So what I can do, if I don't want to, let's say I don't want this ever to go down and shine in the eyes of my audience, I could go in here and say, okay, I only want to give this 90 degrees motion, minus 90 and plus 90, which means it's only going to allow me to come to the flat on each side. It will not go below. It'll always be straight. So for some reason, if a sequence is making the light point farther down, where it might go into a house or the second story of a building, a neighbor or whatever, you can actually set these numbers up as hard limits so it'll never go below. For the sequencing that I do and in the store, I go ahead and leave these wide open at minus 180. So that gives me the full range of motion. And I could actually make that minus 135 and 135, and it'll still go the full range of motion. And when we say minus 80 and minus 180, it's referencing it from pointing straight up in the tilt. So it looks at that as 0, and it says I can either come plus 180, which is forward, and minus 180, which is backwards. Okay? So what the other parameter that it says is orient to 0. So in other words, what what do I want the 0 position when I say, okay, um, what is the value of this light below the 180 degree line? So in my case, I want to give it the full tilt down, which is 45 degrees. So I put a value of 45 in there. So in other words, what it says is to go to 0, I have to go down 45 degrees. Now, the other important parameter for this is orient to up. In other words, what degree value is straight up for the light? And this is where you're going to have to look at what the full range of um, your light is. In the case of this one, it's 270 degrees. So if I take 270, divide it by 2, that's 135 degrees. So from 0, which is down here, I have to rotate 135 degrees to point straight up. Okay, so you do have to do a little bit of maths when you're looking at these setups. Another popular number for these is like 240 degrees. And so in that case, you would take 240, divide it by 2, and you'd make this number 120. And 120 degrees is what's straight up. And it's important for xLights to know that, because then when it sends when you want it pointing straight up, it's actually going to send a DMX command of 128, um, which it expects when it sends a DMX of 128, which is half of 255, it's going to be pointing straight up. So if you don't have this number right, then it will point at different angles. And again, your tilt has a slew rate value on it as well. So let's look at the next parameter, which is the color properties. Now, each moving head is going to have a different set of values for its color wheel. There isn't really a standard. There are a couple where they'll kind of line up. It depends on the manufacturers and the brands. So typically with the color wheel, you're going to have the same parameters that you're filling in. So what is the color wheel channel? So when we looked at that before, it was channel 9. What is the dimmer channel? And that's channel 8. So if we were to go back to our channel layout that we had on our sheet and the manufacturers, we can see that the color wheel is channel 9 and our dimmer is channel 8. Now the dimmer also will need to get set up separately, and I'll show that in a couple minutes. But you go through, and that's why it's important to find the models of the moving head if you can find them, and just import them, because you really don't want to go through and set this all up manually. You'll get your manual with your moving head. There'll be a page in there. Some manuals are better than others. I'm going to tell you they're not real clear sometimes, but it'll go in and set up the colors, and it'll tell you, this is a 16 channel color wheel and what each value is in DMX that has that color on it. So it's important to make sure this stuff lines up if you want the colors to work properly. Again, my recommendation is get a hold of a model that's already set up for you so that you don't have to go through this. If not, it will come up once you put 16, it will put 16 channels in here, and then you're going to have to go in and put the right colors in, and you're also going to have to put in the right DMX value for that particular color. Okay. So now the other two important properties are the dimmer and the shutter. So I told you when you import, use the import and import the model like we did here. If we click on this particular model and we open up the dimmer and the shutter, you can see that both those values came in as 0. Okay. So you're going to have to go in and manually enter those. So if I go back to um, the dimmer and the shutter here. If we went in on the sheet I showed you before, the dimmer is 8 and the shutter is 7. Threshold and on value, basically those will be default. You don't usually have to mess with those. But these are very important to have set up properly when you set the model up, okay? And that will allow you to turn the light on and off. Because if you don't have these set up properly, and then we don't set the strings up in a minute to allow the light to function, you'll never get a beam of light or any light to come out of the moving head when it's turned on. Now there are some other properties you can play with if you want. If there's a look, so you can see like when I imported this one, you can barely see the beam, and the beam is pretty long on this. You can go in and this has nothing to do with the actual light. This is strictly for what the model looks like. You can play with these values and make these numbers whatever you want. Like if I make that a 1, you're almost never going to see it. If you make it a 10, it'll be short. I think in my store, I have this set up as a 10 just because I want to be able to see it. And this is what, when you look at it in the sequencer, or when the lights come on, that'll be the length of the beam that you see when you go on it. And you can also play with the width if you want to make these beams wider. I think I take mine up to like 3 or 4, just to kind of get a little bit of you know uh, a nice look to it so you can see it when it's when you're sequencing. Now, you also have the ability, you can go in and mess with what this looks like. There's what's called a base mesh and a yoke mesh and a head mesh. So if you look, if we zoomed in here and kind of rotated around, you can have a base. This is called the yoke, and that's the head of the moving head. And you can see like this one over here looks different. This particular model, they used it different. Each of these are what are called meshes in the 3D world and the object. You can go in there and pick a file if you want. You can click on this and find a mesh file somewhere. Um, that's preference up to you. I personally would just leave the standard that it comes in with. But if for some reason you don't like the look of this, you can go into the mesh. I'm not going to go into in this video on how to change that, but you can do that for the yoke and the head and the base. And then there's some other common properties down here. So I'm going to leave all these uh, blank because I don't need to mess with these. Same with the string properties and all these other ones down here. I'm going to leave all that uh, as defaults for now because we really don't need to mess with those.
Okay, so let's take a quick look at some of the other manufacturers' moving heads. Um, the predecessor to the YPS Starlight was the 350 watt version, which is will have different channel numbers. It was also a 16 channel type moving head, but the pan in this case was channel 10 and 11, or if you looked at the Starlight, the pan was channel 1 and 3. So there are differences even from the manufacturers depending on the model number. So it's important when you bring these models in to just double check and make sure that the channel sheet that you get with your moving head matches with the model. We try to make sure these are accurate. So the ones that I'm showing here will be on the website. They have been used with the moving heads and worked, but in the end, it's up to you to double check and make sure the channels and things all line up and make sure there's no mistakes when things are imported. So here's a Dominator moving head. Now, what I did with this to show this orient to zero. So something I wanted to be very, I guess I didn't maybe make clear when I was going through these models is the model when you bring into the xLights always defaults to this look. Okay, it comes in pointing down to the right. That's ground zero. Now your moving head. Let's say you mounted your moving head on the roof. Uh, pointing straight out like this. So in other words, when it's off, it's pointing to the front of the house. That's where setting up this orient to zero number is important because you need to tell the model how your moving head is physically mounted or where it's pointing with reference to the default. So in this case, this this moving head, because it's a counterclockwise moving head, is 270 degrees around to the front. So we have to tell it that, hey, the model has to be oriented 270 degrees to match where the moving head is physically mounted on um, your roof. Now, the second important parameter is, remember I told you, this is a counterclockwise moving head. So if your moving head, if you mounted it like this with the keypad in the front, when it first starts, it can't rotate in the clockwise direction, right? Oops, which would be going from kind of this direction if you were watching it moving around. So if I kind of looked at it from the top, it would be moving in this direction around here, okay? So what xLights has to do to make sure that at when you say this is the front and starting from zero, so that it can move in both directions, you have to tell it to orient to front. I actually have to come around 360 degrees. So remember when we brought that chart up, that kind of showed the directions of what you had to go and orient the unit to. So if we look at the diagram, remember we said, okay, I'm going to mount that unit, it's forward. This is from my keypad. So when I tell xLights that where is this thing going to be when you zero it out, it needs to come around 360 degrees. And that's what xLights is going to where the xLights is going to put the moving head in order to use the calculations, everything it uses to move it. So now that I've come 360, because I have 540 degrees of motion, I can still come around to the back this way, and I can come around the back this way. If I didn't rotate it, remember, like I said, when it's pointed forward, I won't be able to rotate in clockwise direction. So it can't move this way because it's at a hard limit. It can move this way and it can go another 180 degrees. So that's why when we tell it to orient it to zero, or I'm sorry, orient to front, that we want that moving head to come around 360 degrees, okay? That's very important to understand when you set these models up because that orient to zero is in relation to where the model is set up versus how you physically mounted your moving head on the roof, okay? So I put that one different just to kind of show it. This is a Wally's light moving head. It's a 16 channel. Again, its various parameters will be slightly different. Some of the channels, sometimes they'll be the same, sometimes they won't. This is the Matos Phoenix Ray moving head. It's a 14 channel moving head. Again, um, the channel layouts and some of the values will be different. And that particular moving head, I don't think has a fine channel or adjustment. And then this is the 380 watt Phoenix Ray. So again, it's important when you set these up to make sure you have the appropriate model information in them for the various types of moving heads. So I put the moving head names in here and then I moved them 1 through 6 just so you could kind of see the different types. Now, the next video will go into actually the sequencing, but you'll to verify if these are set up right. And I'm not going to go into this any detail at all until I get done or when I go into the sequencing is when, let's move this in a little bit. So let's open this and you can see right now, and I'm in the sequencer, these are in their uh, default positions like we showed earlier in the layout tab, right? So this is the advanced moving head sequence effect. And again, I'm going to go through the details of this in the next video. I merely just want to show you why setting these parameters up and how to verify if they're right. If you can watch, this is going to play, and then you're going to see in a second when it hits the effect, all those moving heads moved, right? So now what's happened is, if we go back, play that one more time, and kind of watch these heads, they've spun around and they're pointing straight up. So now xLights calls this the zero position. And we know we've got the model set up because it looks like everybody's pointing up and everybody's pointing in the front direction. So all those parameters that we set up, especially like the one that we had, remember, we had this one pointing to the front. xLights made the changes it needed. So we'll play this one more time and kind of watch this one. See how it came around 360. These ones only move 270, but now everything's at its default position. So you know that you've got the model set up. And that's the great thing about the effect in the model, because now when I sequence it, it doesn't matter what these manufacturers are, they're all going to do the same thing. And we'll go through that in the sequencing portion in the sequencing video. Okay, so before we get to sequencing, we still have a few more things to set up in our models to make sure we have all the tools necessarily to apply the sequencing techniques. So the first thing you want to do is once you've plopped all your moving heads down and got them put in your display, you're going to want to select all of them, right click, create a group from that selection, and create a group called either moving head all group or all moving heads or whatever you want to call it. I usually like to start with MH so everything shows up in the list in the same area because obviously as your displays get larger and you have more props and groups, these lists can get pretty long and you want to be able to find these things pretty quickly. I've already created a group, so I'm not going to create this one. The next thing we got to do is we've got to create a way to open up the shutters and then also control the dimmer. So when we say controlling the dimmer, that dimmer means the brightness of that light. And that's what the sequencing is going to do. You're going to adjust the intensity of that light on your moving head depending on what you want it to do in your sequence. And we'll go through that in the sequencing portion, in the sequencing video. But for this video right now, I just want you to understand that these are the tools we're going to need. So we need to be able to open those shutters, and those are going to stay on the whole time. And we're also going to need to control the dimmers or the intensity of those lights. So I'm going to I'll recreate another string. I've already got the dimmer set up once, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. So just to walk you through the steps. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to collect the single line, and we're going to put a single line down. And you're going to come up with the base properties that a single line comes up with. And then I'm going to call this moving head shutters 2, just so we can distinguish it from the original one. Now what you're going to want to do is go in here, and the number of strings is the number of moving heads you have in your display. So we have 6 in here, so I'm going to make that 6. The number of nodes per string is going to be 1. So that's going to set up the base parameters we're going to need in a minute to set up the actual start channels. Now, right now, it'll come up as you've got no controller, so I need to select this, and I need to go in here and say Use Start Channel. And then I want to come to the individual start channels, and I want to say I want to have an individual start channel. So basically what this is going to do is I'm going to allow me to set the dimmer number for each moving head. And I'll walk you through that so that you can see how that's done. So the first string then, once we've got this set up, is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit the 3 dots and I'm going to select that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to go to the start of a model. I want to find moving head 1. So remember, this is why I named these conventions so that, I can find them in the list, right? My first one's my moving head. And then the start channel is going to be the dimmer channel. So earlier we looked at the sheet, and I know that the shutter, I'm sorry, not the dimmer, the shutter is, I believe, 8 on the starlight. So I put in the number 8 and I hit OK. And what it does is it says, okay, your first string is moving head, starlight, advanced, and then bit or channel number 8 is the shutter. So then I'm going to go to the second one, do the same thing, start of model, pick moving head number 2, and then put the channel in for the dimmer there, or for the shutter, I'm sorry. And go through that and do that for all of them. So what happens is, I'm sorry, that one should have been 3. That's why I wanted to check on it because I didn't memorize them all. So what I did was you basically go through for each of these and set that up. Now, what's interesting here is a lot of the moving heads, use the same channel for dimmer, but some of them don't. So the 350 watt outdoor YPS uses 3. The Phoenix Ray Max uses channel 16 for the shutter. So this is where, even though you have different brands and different setups, when they all get grouped into the string, they will be set up properly so that the appropriate channel that turns the shutter on will go to that individual light. And you can go ahead and hit save. Now we're going to do the same thing for the dimmers, right? So we would create another string. We'd call this moving head dimmers 2. We have 6 moving heads. There's 1 light per moving head. We want to use individual start channels because we want to be, whoops, I'm sorry, we jumped ahead. We need to go to the controller and say use individual start channels. Then select that. And then what I'm going to do is same thing. I'm going to go in here and pick the string. I'm going to hit the 3 little bars. I'm going to go moving head number 1. And I believe that was channel 7. And you're going to go down the list for all the dimmers and do the same thing. So in this case, it was number 8. I chose 7, but these are the actual values, and you can see that the dimmers are different for most of them, right? So it's important that this gets set up properly because that's going to be what xLights sends to the moving head for the light intensity or the dimmer value. And if you watch the first video, basically what that is there's a disc in there that kind of blocks the light, and it based on a percentage of blocking that gives you the brightness as it gets diffused through the lens. So that's kind of how the dimmers work. So if you haven't watched the first video, I go through kind of the moving head anatomy and how some of that stuff works. So to give you a better understanding of how that all gets pulled together. So now that I've got those two strings set up, that basically gives you all the basics to move into the sequencing portion, which we'll go into in a minute. So just to review some of the top points is when you do these models, it's very important to make sure that you have the pan and tilt orient to zero and orient to front numbers and everything set up properly so that when xLights goes in and does the moving heads, that you're going to be positioned in the right way so when things get sequenced. And actually, I needed to re-render that before it works. And then it should come around. There you go, because I made some changes while we were going through that. So in the next video, we will go into this new effect and all the various things that it can do and some of the sequencing techniques for the moving heads. So I am Barry Wiles with Sequence Solutions, and this is your aha moment of the day. And I hope you got at least some new things out of this that will help you get your display set up. So have a good day.